Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Today we're diving into a story that will make you question love and loyalty. What would you do if the woman you love is carrying your child, but your own mother refuses to accept her and believes everything is a lie? Stay with me to uncover the truth behind this emotional conflict. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Tieu Lac never thought she would return. Not like this. Not to a place that once felt so distant from her world, and now stood right in front of her, tall, cold, and impossible to ignore. The car slowed down as it approached the massive iron gate. Behind it stood the CEO's house. No, his family's house. A place that didn't just represent wealth, but power, status, and expectations that people like her were never meant to step into. Tieu Lac sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands resting protectively on her belly. The baby had grown so much that even sitting for too long made her uncomfortable. But she didn't complain. She didn't say anything at all. Her eyes remained fixed ahead, watching the gate slowly open. Beside her, the CEO tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He had imagined this moment many times. But now that it was happening, it didn't feel like a reunion. It felt like walking into a storm. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, not taking his eyes off the road. Tieu Lac let out a slow breath. "I already chose." Her voice was calm, too calm. "If I keep running, it will never end." A pause. "And this child deserves more than that." The CEO glanced at her briefly. There was something in her expression he hadn't seen before. Strength, not the fragile strength of someone trying to survive, but the quiet, grounded strength of someone who had already faced the worst and was no longer afraid of it. The car came to a stop. The gate closed behind them with a heavy metallic sound. There was no turning back now. The house was larger than anything Tieu Lac had ever stepped into. High ceilings, polished floors, cold, elegant furniture arranged with perfect precision. Everything about it spoke of control, of order, of a world where emotions were secondary to status. As soon as they stepped inside, a maid approached quickly. "Sir, Madam is waiting in the living room." The CEO nodded. Tieu Lac felt her heartbeat quicken, not out of fear, but anticipation, because she knew this was the moment everything would change. The living room was silent, too silent. At the center of it, seated upright on a long sofa, was the CEO's mother. Elegant, composed, impeccable. Her eyes lifted the moment they entered, and immediately, they landed on Tieu Lac, not warmly, not curiously, but sharply, as if measuring, evaluating, judging. Tieu Lac felt it instantly, that gaze. It didn't need words to speak. "You're late," the woman said, her voice calm but distant. The CEO stepped forward slightly. "Mum," but she raised a hand, stopping him. Her eyes never left Tieu Lac. "So, this is her." A simple sentence, but it carried weight. Tieu Lac didn't look away. She stood there, one hand gently resting on her belly, meeting that gaze with quiet steadiness. The room held its breath. Then, the CEO's mother stood up, slowly, gracefully. She walked closer, each step deliberate, until she stood directly in front of Tieu Lac, close enough to see everything: the curve of her stomach, the simplicity of her clothes, the absence of anything that belonged to this world. Her lips curved slightly, not a smile, something colder. "You've come quite far." Tieu Lac said nothing. The CEO stepped in. "Mum, she's staying here." A brief silence, then a soft laugh, not amused, not kind, sharp. "Staying?" The woman turned to him. "Are you serious?" Her eyes hardened. "You disappeared for months. You ignored everything, and now you come back. With this?" The word lingered. This. Not her name, not a person. Just this. The CEO's jaw tightened. "She's carrying my child." That sentence cut through the room, heavy, final. But instead of softening, his mother's expression grew even colder. "Is she?" Silence. The air shifted. Tieu Lac felt it. That moment, that single sentence that changed everything. "Is she?" Doubt, clear, unhidden, like a blade placed right between them. The CEO frowned. "What do you mean?" His mother looked at Tieu Lac again, this time slower, more deliberate. "As far as I know, you've been gone long enough." Her voice was smooth, controlled. "But she shows up pregnant, at exactly the right time." Tieu Lac's fingers tightened slightly over her belly. The accusation wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was precise, calculated, and deeply insulting. "You think this child is mine?" the CEO asked, his tone sharpening. His mother didn't answer immediately. She simply tilted her head slightly. "I think," she said slowly, "that people from different worlds have different ways of surviving." The words landed, heavy, cruel. Tieu Lac understood immediately. This wasn't just doubt, it was judgment on her background, her life, her worth. A quiet humiliation wrapped in elegance. The CEO stepped forward. "That's enough." But his mother didn't stop. "If she's telling the truth, then prove it." Her eyes locked onto Tieu Lac. "Or are we supposed to just believe that a girl like you suddenly appears carrying the heir of this family?" The word heir echoed, not as something precious, but as something that needed to be protected from her. The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned to Tieu Lac, waiting, judging, measuring. And in that moment, she realized something. This wasn't going to be a home. It was a battlefield. Tieu Lac took a slow breath. Her voice when she spoke was steady. "I didn't come here to prove anything." The CEO's mother raised an eyebrow slightly. "Then why are you here?" Tieu Lac looked at her directly. "Because he asked me to come back." A pause. "And because this child deserves to know where it belongs." The answer was simple, but it carried dignity. Not pleading, not defensive, just truth. For a brief second, something flickered in the older woman's eyes, but it disappeared quickly. "You speak well," she said, "better than I expected." Another pause. "But words don't change facts." She turned away slightly, as if the conversation was already beneath her. "You can stay." The CEO exhaled slightly, but then she added, "temporarily." That one word changed everything again. "Until we know the truth." The CEO's expression darkened. "There is no truth to check. I know. You know what you want to believe." She cut him off cleanly. "And that is exactly what worries me." Silence fell once more, heavy, tense, unresolved. Tieu Lac stood there, unmoving, but inside, something had shifted. Not fear, not sadness, something sharper. Because now she understood clearly. This wasn't just about being accepted. It was about being tested, measured, and possibly rejected. Again. That night, in the large, unfamiliar room prepared for her, Tieu Lac sat alone on the edge of the bed. The silence here felt different. Not peaceful, not safe. Cold, like the walls themselves were watching her. She placed a hand on her belly. The baby moved slightly, as if responding. "I'm here," she whispered softly. But her voice didn't sound as strong as before. Because deep down, a question had returned, the same one she thought she had already answered. Should I have come back? A soft knock broke her thoughts. The door opened. The CEO stepped in. He looked at her, really looked, and immediately saw it. The quiet tension, the weight she was carrying. "I'm sorry," he said, simple, honest, but heavy. Tieu Lac didn't look at him right away. "She thinks I'm lying." He walked closer. "I don't." A pause, then she finally looked up. "And if she never believes me?" The question hung between them, not dramatic, not loud, but real. Because this time, running wasn't the only fear, staying might hurt even more. The CEO didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out slowly and placed his hand gently over hers, and over the child. Our child. His voice was low, steady. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." But even as he said it, both of them knew the hardest part was just beginning. Tieu Lac returns with the CEO to his family's luxurious home, hoping to finally stop running and give their unborn child a stable future. However, instead of acceptance, she is met with cold judgment from the CEO's mother, who openly doubts the child's identity and suspects Tieu Lac of deception because of her background. The house quickly becomes a place of tension, where every word feels like a test. While the CEO stands by her side and promises protection, he is caught between his love for Tieu Lac and his mother's authority. Tieu Lac begins to question whether coming back was the right choice, as the emotional pressure grows heavier each day. Now she must decide whether to stay and fight for her dignity and her child, or leave once again before history repeats itself.